Hi everyone, today I want to detail my plans on how I'm going to try to achieve world first in hardcore in Diablo 4 on launch. So obviously I'm going to be playing the early access because by the time that the game comes out, this is basically over. So yeah, we're going to go on June 1st / June 2nd, depending on the time zone that you're in. And we are trying to race to be the first to level 100 and also the first to kill the pinnacle boss that Blizzard has teased. So I'm not going to go into details about that. There is an achievement that gives you a hint on what that pinnacle boss is. I think it's going to be pretty epic, but we will have to wait and see for that. I imagine it's going to be a relatively hard thing to do, at least when you are under-leveled or not even 100 yet, basically. Then this boss might be maybe close to undoable. So we'll see. But this is kind of the idea that I had for myself for launch. I want to try to be as fast as possible. I want to play on hardcore. Now, there are some problems with hardcore, which I'm going to detail in another video soon. We've already seen this from the open beta that hardcore does have many exploits, so it's a bit sad, I gotta say. And well, I'm also going to do this all solo, which means that I probably have no chance of being a world first anyway. Another thing that I'm going to detail very soon is that group play is oppressively, multiple times more powerful than solo play. So in general, it's not looking good for me, but I think it's going to be fun anyway. And especially it's going to be fun for you guys, I guess, watching when I'm going to be streaming this live on my Twitch channel. Obviously, I'm going to be blasting 24 hours a day, basically. On top of that, we are also unlikely to know who is the actual world first, because there's probably no in-game notification or there's no leaderboard and these kind of things. So really, it might just be some random guy who we don't know. But on the other hand, yeah, I think it's going to be just fun in general to try this on hardcore, to go in and just have this kind of race at the start. So I think it's going to be really cool to see. Anyway, let's go into the details of my plan. So if you have seen my other video talking about which difficulty to start on, 1 or 2, you have Adventurer and Veteran. I already mentioned that I will be starting on Adventurer, and I will only be skipping to Veteran if I have a huge power spike. So in the case of a Rogue, I'll be playing a Rogue, not because it's the most powerful class, but because it's my main class. And I think that Veteran is going to be probably a bit too slow when it comes to just blasting through the campaign. This is really the first step, the most important one. You want to get to the end of the campaign as fast as possible, because during the campaign you will unlock the mount, and you need to finish the campaign to go to Nightmare. And I'm going to talk why this is important in a second. So basically you want to try to be as fast as possible in the campaign without really all that much regard to the levels that you are gaining. I expect that you're not actually going to end up at level 50 just doing the campaign, and if you just completely skip any kind of side content, it will probably be lower than that. There are certain minimum levels around the world for the various zones, at least while you're playing the campaign, so you kind of have to catch up in levels here and there a little bit. And being under-leveled too far, especially in hardcore, can be quite dangerous. And on top of this, you might also slow down from fighting too high-level monsters, which makes this whole going on adventurer strategy not really as good. So the idea is that whenever I have a huge power spike, I will switch to Veteran to get this 20% extra XP from kills. And I will probably also do some side content. Most importantly, getting the first skill point from the Renown in every single region. This is basically something you kind of do on the side. I believe you only need 200 Renown for the first unlock, and a dungeon gives you 30, an altar gives you 10, exploration gives you 5 per zone, and stuff like that. So basically what I was doing, for example, in my Act 1, trial runs during the open beta, is that I completed the first Renown in Fractured Peaks while doing the Act 1 campaign. And I'm planning to do a similar route in all of the regions. So this way you get probably 2-3 extra levels or so from doing a certain dungeon. Something that you can just complete on the side without really going out of your way. And like this you also get a nice power spike. 5 extra skill points is relatively powerful. And especially when it comes to being under-leveled towards the end of the campaign, they can probably be a lifesaver. So to sum up the early game, it will be Adventurer until I get power spikes, for example, combo points on a Rogue, or maybe a huge legendary weapon, or The Blade Dancer aspect that you can unlock, I think it's in Scott's Glen, so this should also be something like around level 15 or so. I will be playing Distinct Blades. So this is a pretty powerful unlock, and it should also make Veteran a bit more smooth. Now comes Nightmare Difficulty, which is starting at level 50. So finishing a campaign, I am aiming for hitting something like level 45 or something like that, maybe closer to 50 if I can, depending on where I am with the Renown progress. Maybe I'll skip a region or so, and just try to finish the campaign rather early, whenever I feel I'm strong enough to actually tackle those bosses. And then you want to do Nightmare Difficulty. So for that you have to do the Cathedral of Light in Kyovashat in World Tier 2 Veteran. So what this means is that when you play on World Tier 1 all the time on Adventurer, you basically have a huge jump in difficulty at this point, because you probably don't fight level 50 monsters yet, and you jump from 1 to 3 when you do that. Instead of for example, playing on Veteran where stuff is just generally a bit harder, and then you have a smoother difficulty curve into Tier 3, so to say. So this is something to be aware of, and something that I'm also going to be quite careful with, because I'm going to be on hardcore. But basically the idea is to complete this Cathedral of Light as early as possible at around maybe 45, so that then I can join Nightmare Difficulty. And from what we know is that this capstone dungeon is kind of like the hard part, and afterwards it's a bit easier again, so to say, once you are actually playing Nightmare Difficulty. But what it does is that it unlocks higher level items. The sacred items, they can roll much higher item power, they can roll higher stats, and then you can also get some of those endgame activities here. There's Hell Tides and all this kind of good stuff. And you get 100% extra experience, which is the real kicker here. So since we are trying to race for experience to level 100, having more experience from monsters is obviously a huge spike. So in this case, for example, going from Veteran to Nightmare, we would get double the experience per monster, fighting the same monsters on the same level. While with Veteran it's only plus 20%. So even from Veteran to Nightmare is almost double basically. So the idea is that you are going to be slightly underleveled and fight Nightmare monsters. And if you can do that at a decent pace, I'd say, this is probably going to be a massive experience gain. Now at this point it will be important that I avoid any kind of difficult content, because this is going to be quite hard just on its own already. So the idea is that I do mostly outdoor content, side quests for example, or also strongholds. Strongholds actually scale to your character's level after you have reached the kind of minimum level of that stronghold. But for example, people were farming in Khor Dragan, which has a minimum level of 30. But for example, if you go to Nostrava, it has a lower minimum level, and the monsters are always exactly +2 levels of your character. So this would actually be a pretty good target to do. You can just go around the world and finish the strongholds, because they're not going to be as high level as probably most of the other enemies around you. They're always going to be +2 of your character, which is relatively easy to achieve outside of maybe the boss fights in those strongholds. And like this, you can quite reliably already start farming some sacred loot. You can already start getting this extra bonus XP, and then you pair this with more renown objectives, especially the side quests. So you can go around all the world, you can find all those waypoints, you can do some side quests on the way, and maybe start getting the second skill point in all of the regions as you slowly level up through outdoor content. Now, outdoor content is definitely a slower way to level than just, for example, grinding dungeons, but you definitely want to get that renown at some point, and you should do it before level 100, because else you have a really long progression path all the way to 100 where you're just missing out on extra power. So the idea is that you get those first skill points very early in the progression here on Adventurer, Veteran, between level 1 and 40 or something like that. You want to do the first renown everywhere, and then you get the second and the third renown while farming easy stuff in Nightmare Difficulty, which will probably also lead you relatively close to level 70, I imagine. So you have to do significantly more stuff to actually achieve this, and then once you actually reach the recommended level, 50 plus, you can also start doing dungeons, for example, because they're not really going to be that hard anymore when you're not under-leveled. So by the time I've caught up with the levels, the plan is that I can also start going around, do some of the normal dungeons, maybe unlock a certain dungeon here and there for a Codex of Power aspect, so that I have the extra potions and the next skill points. So I have the full 58 skill points that you can have for the skill tree. I don't really expect to see much in terms of unique items, and for example on the Rogue, I also don't really expect many of them to really matter for the most part. But the sacred items just rolling like higher stats is going to be quite important. And if you can unlock them early, you can get some pretty massive power spikes. So this is the idea here. We get them early, we have some insane power spikes, and then we just fly through Nightmare difficulty as much as possible, especially with the dungeons later. You want to like do them fast to get this Renown, to unlock your stuff and progress further. And then comes Torment difficulty. So similar again to Nightmare, you have to unlock this by doing a capstone dungeon, and you get 200% XP bonus instead of 100%. And you can find ancestral items, so there's like yet another tier of like quality basically that you can find. And it's going to be kind of like a repeat of the process that we did with Nightmare, where we're probably trying to do it a bit earlier. For example, let's say level 65 or something like that, maybe even earlier on softcore. And then you can already profit from all those perks when you are farming easy stuff in Torment difficulty while being underleveled. So the idea is that whenever I'm farming Nightmare and I feel like I have kind of caught up with my gear, for example, by having like a full range of sacred items with good stats, especially defensive stats, I guess, we can maybe start going into this Torment capstone dungeon and unlock it early yet again. And being underleveled quite accelerates your XP gain, especially because the baseline XP is now triple instead of double. With 200% increased experience gain, you're gonna level significantly faster than you would otherwise do on Nightmare, as long as your kill speed stays rather similar. I don't really think that I'm gonna have too much trouble once I have like a fully set up character, and I'm gonna be flying through Torment level soon enough, I believe. So it's going to be mostly about actually completing this capstone dungeon without dying on hardcore. And then again, we're going to repeat this process that we have done with Nightmare. So as long as we are under leveled in Torment difficulty, because it has like the level floor of 70, and let's say we unlock it with 65, we're going to be quite behind in levels. So we're going to start doing easy stuff again, like slow progression, so to say, with, for example, side quests yet again, maybe finishing the last strongholds, finishing like altars and whatever kind of exploration. So that we have, in the end, like all of the world unlocked, we have all of the dungeons unlocked, we have all the waypoints, and then we are kind of like ready and set up for the big dungeon grind. So the overarching idea of this whole Nightmare and Torment unlock strategy is that I'm kind of slow rolling my progression, starting after the campaign all the way through level 70, because I want to do the Renown objectives, which I believe to be relatively important. Like 10 skill points, 5 potion slots, and 20 paragon points are no joke. So you get a lot of extra power there, and of course some OP builds, especially on softcore, might not need that, and you can maybe just like rush straight to level 100 with like the most efficient dungeon farm. But I think that, at least on hardcore, especially as a solo player, I don't expect to have such an easy time, and I want to rather have those power spikes before I go for just the all-out XP grind. So basically at around level 70, maybe up to 80 or so, I will try to finish all the Renown, all 5 steps in all regions. And then it really comes down to the dungeon grind from that point. And you might have noticed that in this whole strategy so far, I have not mentioned Nightmare dungeons, which are basically the primary endgame target, I guess. And there's a reason for that. So number one is that once you reach level 50, you will not have access to all of the glyphs. So this is like the random snapshot here from this video from the Diablo channel, and you can see those glyphs here. They're going to be put into those paragon boards, and you have to level them up through doing Nightmare dungeons. And the thing is that on the early tiers of Nightmare dungeons, you're not going to get a lot of like glyph XP to actually rank them up. So the idea is to delay Nightmare dungeons in general as long as possible by completing everything else there is to do first, especially the Renown objectives, and then focusing solely on Nightmare dungeon grind from that point. There are 2 advantages here. So number one is the faster glyph leveling, because starting Nightmare dungeons as soon as you hit Nightmare difficulty just doesn't really give you much from leveling up those glyphs, if you even have them in the first place. But by the time that you're level 70, level 80, you probably have acquired most of them. And the second point is that while in outdoor content in the world, all the monsters scale to your level, starting at a certain minimum level, in Nightmare dungeons you get to choose the monster level by doing a certain tier of a dungeon. So the monsters scale up with higher tiers of a dungeon, and this means that you can choose to be underleveled at all times. So basically what I was trying to do with this whole strategy is I was trying to be underleveled as much as possible, as long as possible, so that I get more XP when I fight higher level monsters. And you can do exactly that again when you do Nightmare dungeons. So monsters scale up to level 150 in the highest tier nightmare dungeons at tier 100. They start at level 50 with nightmare difficulty, because this is where you can get tier 1 nightmare dungeons. So it's 1 level per tier. And this means that, for example, if I'm like level 75, I want to run a nightmare dungeon of something like, yeah, tier 26, tier 28, tier 30 or something like that. And generally dungeons give you the most XP. So dungeons have very high elite density, depending on which dungeon you're running. You know, some of them have some objectives where you have to fight animus carriers, for example. Some of them are just like quite populated, and the elite density is generally higher in dungeons compared to outdoors. And also outdoors, doing side quests, for example, finding waypoints and doing strongholds, there's a lot of traveling involved. So even with the mount, I think that there's going to be a significant downtime, like just running around and actually not really killing anything. And even if you try to kind of like grind your way through the zones as you go, as you explore, it's not going to be as fast as just chaining dungeons. So once I'm done with all those renown circles, now is the time for the real grind and the last push towards level 100, so to say. So if you're looking at the time schedule, that means that for me, for example, for launch, I will do roughly a 30-hour stream or so, as is tradition, of which I guess something like 22 to 24 hours will be actual game time. The rest will be waiting for the launch, sitting in queue and breaks, I guess. So I guess it's relatively achievable to finish all the campaign plus most of the renown, like basically like around level 60, level 70 or so. Probably in around the first session for me. So at least this is kind of like the target here, that we are basically well into nightmare difficulty at the very least by the time I log off for the first time. And then the next day, basically I'm just going to finish up whatever is left for the renown and start going torment difficulty. And from then comes like the real grind in the nightmare dungeons. And the thing is that while leveling to 100, you also just don't really have that many points to spend on your paragon boards to make glyphs work or to like attach a lot of stuff and pick up a lot of nodes. So there might be like some mild respecking involved. For example, early on when I don't have any glyphs, I might just like pick up more of the rare nodes, and then later on I'm going to remove them again. And then I'm going to start going for those glyphs, for example. But basically at that point, like level 80 or so is kind of like where you start attaching like the second, the third board, the fourth board or something like that. And things get a bit more complicated with your paragons. So this is exactly the time when we pick up the pace and we start blasting through those nightmare dungeons. Always increasing the tier slightly. Whenever I level up, I'm going to try to go exactly 1 tier higher so that I always stay a bit under leveled to the monsters and I get optimal like monster kill to XP ratio. So you see here that if you are over leveled, you are getting significantly less XP, and even just like 1 level difference is already minus 10%. And similarly, being 1 level behind the monsters is a bonus of plus 15%, which is pretty massive. And this scales up to being unleveled 3 levels. So being around 3 levels behind the monsters is usually the optimal XP to difficulty ratio, so to say. Going back to the dungeon grind, I guess at that point, like level 80 or so, it will definitely be like smooth sailing all the way to 100 going forward. It's just chaining those nightmare dungeons, maybe doing a hell tide in between because you need certain materials that you can get there for rolling your items, for example. You need those fiend roses that can only get on hell tide to roll your legendary items, for example. So you definitely want to have this kind of stuff. And then you can already start working on having like really good gear as you progress to level 100. And not really worry too much about sorting out your loot all that much anymore. I guess you're going to find some really good pieces that are worth holding on to at that point, so that you can kind of like just chain those dungeons back to back to back without really much downtime in between. I think that especially in this middle part of the progression between the campaign and the nightmare dungeon grind at the end, you're going to have this renown completion like progress block, so to say. And I think especially there, you're going to have a lot of downtime on top of the slow progression. So first of all, you don't get much XP because of doing all the side quests and these kind of things and the exploration. And you also have to spend a lot of time just, fixing your gear, imprinting, upgrading, comparing items, because you have like massive power spikes at that point. And then once you are comfortably already in Torment Difficulty, I don't really expect you're going to waste that much time on your gear anymore. You're just going to skim through your items that you find, definitely trash like 99% of it, or sell it to the vendor for the gold, and you're just going to keep blasting non-stop. So your leveling speed is most likely actually going to improve towards the end and not actually slow down very much. At least this is my expectation. So this means that if you're doing something like level 60, level 70, day 1, from that point, I'm probably not going to stream like 24 hours every day, but probably something like 17, 18 or so. So day 2, I would probably be something like 40 hours in or close to that. And this means that we're probably going to look at something like level 80 plus already at that point. And then it just comes down to like grinding out those last like 20 levels. Now, we don't know exactly how the XP skin is going to be. If it's going to be like, Diablo 2, where, level 98 to 99 is like 90% of the entire progression. But I don't really expect that actually in Diablo 4. And I also think it wouldn't matter all too much in terms of like a power gain. It's just like, the last few Paragon points or something. So I expect you're just going to hit level 100 kind of like smoothly, just a bit slower and slower as you go. So this would mean that for a solo player at least, I think you can already start homing in on 100 slowly after day 3 or so, maybe day 4. So basically by the time that the early access is over, I guess I'm going to be at least pretty close to 100. So we'll see. I guess the softcore group boys, they're already going to be like long 100 after like day 2 or something, because it's just that OP. But in terms of solo hardcore, I guess I will be a bit slower. So what this means is that after day 4, I think I'm going to be at least very close to the 100, if not 100 already. And we have to decide on the next steps from there. So if kind of like the world first level 100 is still like, up there to be grabbed, then I'll probably just push for that. But maybe another plan would be to just actually try the pinnacle boss early. So instead of actually level 100, maybe I'll just try to do it, basically, even being a bit underleveled. On hardcore, you probably don't want to just walk in there and get blasted as a melee rogue, so we have to play a real boss killer, which is rapid fire. So I definitely have to like gear up for a second build on the side and then do like a pretty massive respec once I go to attempt that boss. So we'll see. I think that while I probably don't have any real hope of being the first to 100, I think I have a decent chance of being the first to solo kill that boss at the very least. And this is probably going to be like more of the real objective at the end. Because if I have the option to go in before level 100 and kind of shortcut the progression towards it a bit, if I feel comfortable that I have like the right setup, I only have to deal with being a bit underleveled, having less HP and damage and all that, compared to being at my full power, there might actually be a reasonable chance for that. And after all of this, being the first or not, I will be quite happy if my character is still alive and I can keep blasting, of course. So if I'm not 100 yet and I've actually defeated a pinnacle boss, that's going to be even more awesome. And I'm probably just going to finish, leveling those glyphs, finish level 100, get like my best in slot stuff and just keep blasting with, my rogue, trying all kinds of builds. And I guess there is one more target to achieve, which is probably multiple times, exponentially harder than actually leveling to 100 and doing that boss, which is tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons. So even though this boss is called the pinnacle encounter of this game, it's not actually the pinnacle. The real endgame content are those Nightmare Dungeons. And I guess defeating a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon is going to be the ultimate challenge that you can achieve, especially in hardcore. I imagine that those level 150 monsters are going to be no joke, which is part of the reason why I generally put a lot of defenses in all of my builds. So you might have seen me craft these builds here on stream. I actually have like a pretty large library of builds already at this point with endgame builds. And you might notice that I put a lot of defenses into my builds. And whenever people link me their own builds, they generally don't have as much defenses. And I think defenses are going to be extremely important, especially if I want to do this Nightmare Dungeon pushing. So this is going to be kind of the ultimate goal in the end. So past all the grind, past getting best in slot gear, finding my Shaco, of course, I'm going to be attempting to push for the tier 100. But at this point, we're probably talking about at least like a week or so into the game's launch. And this also assumes that I have no rips all the way until then. So no mistakes, no disconnects, nothing basically. And we'll see how that will go. And if tier 100 is actually achievable, like even on softcore. Personally, I'm very excited for Nightmare Dungeon pushing in general, especially in hardcore. I think it's going to be super fun. And I mean, this is what I've been doing like the last decade, basically in Diablo 3. So you guys know me, or most of you do. And I'm definitely going to attempt exactly the same here in Diablo 4 again, with just trying to push basically every single build in the game to its maximum. So this is what we're going to be working on post-launch, post, the initial rush and this race and all that stuff. I'm very excited to just play 1,000 different builds. You know, there's so many builds here that I have on my list of stuff that, you know, will take me years to do, you know, even with the release version of the game, I guess, at this point. So I'm very excited to see where all this will go. What it means for you guys, and maybe something for you to take away here, is that I think that the strategy that I have described is generally the best strategy to go about the whole progression if you play a season enough as a solo player. So if you intend to play enough to get to level 100, if you intend to play enough to actually min-max your character, I think exactly the route that I have described is going to be the way to go, even on softcore, etc. So you just try to rush the campaign, then you unlock Nightmare difficulty by doing the capstone dungeon as early as possible, something like level 40, level 45, if you are strong enough and your progression doesn't slow down too much by going to the higher difficulty. I would definitely recommend to try to do this as early as possible to get the sacred items and to get your 100% bonus XP. And then, as I mentioned, you just start grinding through Nightmare difficulty, slowly doing easy stuff while you're underleveled. For example, the strongholds, for example, the side quests, and finishing your Renown. So between 40 to 75 or so is like the time to do the full Renown grind, in my opinion. Starting with Renown 1, maybe doing the campaign already, and then Renown 2 and 3 to get the next skill points while you're doing Nightmare, and then Renown 4 and 5 in all of the regions. And then you can unlock Torment difficulty, maybe early again if you feel strong enough. You know, something like 65 plus or so would probably be the time to get the ancestral items and even more loot. Finish up whatever is left for your Renown, and then you kind of like start with the infinite Nightmare dungeon grind. Now, this is the most efficient strategy, I believe. This is why I am doing this. Of course, you can always, try to mix and match the activities. You can leave maybe one region for later or 2 regions for later if you want to. You can do it your own path, but I think in terms of doing it the fastest and most optimal way, this is it. And that's it for my strategy. You have to keep in mind that if you're a group player, your progression will look quite different from that actually, because there are a lot of different tricks that you can do in groups that just speed it up massively. Depending on what exactly you do and how professionally you go about it, you will have a very different experience from a solo player. But again, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm gonna talk about this in a separate video, all the little tips and tricks for group players. So stay tuned for that. In general, what you can expect here on the channel is also, I'm gonna have a lot of uploads pre-launch. I'm working on a ton of videos right now. And obviously, once the game goes live, I'm gonna be covering the game for a very, very long time. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I'm gonna say thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys next time.